And just like that, it's the end of 2023, which means it's time for us to do another State of SnowRunner. And I gotta tell you, I'm not necessarily excited to do this because I feel like it's not gonna be super praising of the game. Granted, don't get me wrong, it's a wonderful game and I'm a huge fan of the series and I wouldn't be doing videos like this if I wasn't. However, there is quite a lot to talk about in regards to the game, and of course also a lot to talk about in regards to the community. So let's go ahead and dive right into the rest of the video. So first, I want to talk about player retention, player numbers, and then also player retention in comparison to some other games in the series. Now, full disclosure, I will be using data from Steam charts for this, which I am fully aware does not work in, players that use the Epic Games launcher or players on various console systems. However, I think we'll still be able to get a good idea of player retention from looking at data like this. And we'll also be looking at some of the community updates from the development team over the years and over the course of SnowRunner to see if and how their tone has changed when addressing the community. Now, starting off, I actually dug all the way back to the very first community update to kind of get an idea for the tone that was used then versus the tone that is used now in terms of addressing the community on various updates and issues. Now, the community update that was released for pretty much the very first one was to promote the Season 1 Search and Recover DLC. Now, that was for update 6.0, and it was posted on the 6th of July in 2020, which honestly feels like forever ago now. And oh my god, the foreshadowing in some of these forum comments. Are mods on console included in one of the updates? Some people have been saying they will be. And honestly, it seems kind of odd to think about SnowRunner in a world where mods on console were not part of the game as a whole, or rather as a large part, because that's a lot of the reason why people buy this game now is so they can use various mods that they find on the console mod browser. And speaking of console modding in SnowRunner, let's move forward a little bit in the game's life cycle to November of 2020, where the development team posted on the forums that patch 10 was around the corner. Now, this is, keep in mind, still pre-console modding, so keep that in mind as we talk about this. Now, this is where things start to get interesting because this is where the developers very first revealed their list of requirements for a mod to be eligible for consoles. And this sparked some back and forth, as we'll say, in the actual forum thread that this was posted on that you can actually still read today. Now, the back and forth essentially involved discussion over whether or not private mods would be allowed on consoles, with obviously the answer ending up being no. And as I'm sure you can imagine, not everyone was pleased with this. Not everyone was pleased with this at all. And it led to some, and because I was there in the middle of it when it was all going on, it led to some pretty heated back and forths. It led to a lot of heated comment chains. It also led to some pretty heated arguments in live stream chat, my own live stream chat, which led to us having to moderate our chat pretty heavily at the time. Now, granted, we do have to moderate our chat still for other purposes, or rather other reasons, but I won't get into those here. Fast forwarding once again to December of 2020. December of 2020 actually saw the announcement of mods dropping on consoles. Now, this was a huge deal at the time, and frankly, still is a huge deal whenever really any game that developed its initial following on PC, like the Runner series did, and then migrated over to console gaming, and then, of course, brought mods to the console community. It usually always is a big deal, and it makes a lot of sense that it would be a big deal because I remember back, of course, in the days of MudRunner, when there were rumors here and there that the series was going to eventually at some point allow modding on consoles, and I remember making a couple of videos on that, and I remember honestly getting torn to shreds in my comment section because there were tons of people saying that it would never happen, and I was stupid for even remotely believing it would happen. However, of course, we see how times have now changed. But with mods now available on consoles, it created some unforeseen issues that would unfortunately continue to plague this game to this very day. And this is how this all kind of wraps back around. Firstly, we saw a massive uptick in number of mod downloads. I mean, obviously, this game has, as much as a lot of people kind of begrudgingly refuse to accept this, the following for SnowRunner and the player base for SnowRunner is dramatically larger on consoles than it is on PC. I'm sorry to the PC people if that feels like I'm somehow saying something that's calling you out in some way. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just making it very, very clear where the majority of the player base is for this game and for this series. And this opened a pretty dramatic can of worms when it first when it first arose, let's say, when the concept of console modding actually was thrown into the existence of this game's player base. Because originally, there was no RAM limit. There was no limit to how many mods you could turn on at one time. There was no limit to how many mods you could download. There was no limit to really any of it. It was kind of in its almost Wild West period, if you will. And console users found out very quickly what happens when you A, download a bunch of mods, and then B, you turn them all on at one time, and then you expect them to all work, and you expect everything to work as a vanilla game would. And a lot of console users found out really quickly what happens when you max out your system and you overdo your RAM usage. Your console crashes and your game crashes. And that's not me picking at consoles. That's not me saying consoles are bad. That's just me saying that I guess hardware has its limitations, and obviously consoles are going to be much more hardware limited than a lot of PCs are. But unfortunately, what this led to was people that did not understand what was happening blaming it on the game and filing a bunch of official complaints against SnowRunner on the Xbox Store and on the PlayStation Store. This then led to the developers instituting a RAM usage limit, which then ended up getting people to retaliate against the developers. Didn't want their game to get pulled down from the Xbox and PlayStation stores, because if you're not aware, what happens when a game ends up receiving tons and tons and tons of complaints filed against it, if you receive too many, your game gets pulled. And obviously the developers didn't want that to happen, because they wouldn't be able to sell copies of their game if their game was pulled off of the store. So what ended up happening was, after they instituted that RAM limit, a bunch of people retaliated against the developers, some even going so far as to blame the developers for nerfing mods or not being positive towards the mod community in general. And there were a lot of things that were getting thrown around in this particular point in time in the game's life cycle. Now, we are going to jump a little bit ahead now to present day, but I wanted to give y'all a little bit of a backstory so that things that we're going to talk about now make a little bit more sense. So where is SnowRunner today? As I record this video, it is December 7th of 2023. This game has been through a lot of ups and downs. This game has been through a lot of ups and downs in actually various ways. It's been through a lot of ups and downs in terms of player numbers, stability, modder interest, viewer interest here on YouTube and other streaming platforms, and it's been really interesting to watch for sure. But I think one of the biggest issues that this game ever faced was the lack of support directed at multiplayer stability. Because don't get me wrong, while yes, the developers put in a lot of work to keep this game running, there have been periods of months upon months upon months where players on Xbox systems specifically were completely unable to use the multiplayer component of a game that they, bought and paid for. And as those issues kind of compounded over time, it was interesting to see how the more issues the game had, specifically on Xbox systems, the less people I saw online being interested in watching content about the game. So it's very interesting how the stability of a game can also directly tie into people's interest in watching it, because honestly, a lot of it comes down to, if someone can't watch something in the game and then go and recreate that themselves, they're a whole hell of a lot less likely to watch content on the game in general. And it also shows how, as we move into the future of this series, obviously, yes, we have a game like Expeditions around the corner, which is kind of going to be a little bit more of a spin-off rather than a mainline title. But even then, with a spin-off being right around the corner, like that's great and wonderful and fine, but I think that we will need another mainline entry in the series that is going to need to push the stability of this series forward. Because if the stability is not addressed, there are a lot of people that probably won't come back to this game. They probably won't come back to the series. And honestly, after dealing with a lot of the stability issues, there are a lot of people that, I see them in my comments every day, that will say SnowRunner is a quote-unquote dead game. Now, do I believe that SnowRunner as a whole is a dead game? No. It's still got a bunch of players. It still averages a decent number on the Steam charts, and that's not counting, the people that play this game on Xbox and PlayStation and Switch and stuff like that. Although it is interesting, whenever I post content about the Switch platform for SnowRunner, a lot of people just either don't watch it or lash out at it in the comments. They're like, nobody would want to watch Switch content about SnowRunner. And while sure, the Switch is not a powerful console and it's not necessarily even in the same league as a lot of the other consoles that are on sale today, and there's also still a player base there. There's not only a player base there, but there's also a player base on Switch that uses mods. Now, obviously, you're going to be dealing with an extremely low RAM limit on a Switch because, let's not forget, you can pick up the damn thing in your hands and you can carry it around. So obviously, it's not going to perform like an Xbox Series X would. And of course, add on top of that, all of the back and forth squabbling and politics between mod creators. We have kind of found ourselves in an interesting state of the game now where a lot of the mod creators that we're creating very regularly for this game don't necessarily create as often for it. And if they do, those mods usually aren't as publicly available. Now, we do have several mod creators that are still going strong on SnowRunner, John Hot Rod and Glitchworks, for example. However, a lot of other mod creators have chosen to go private with their mod creation efforts. And that is, of course, to say there's nothing wrong with these mod creators going private. I completely understand why they've done it, and I completely understand why some would choose to do it and others might not. However, one thing that is interesting to me is as the game has gone on, or rather as the game's life cycle has gone on, there have been a lot of people in the community, and particularly in the modding community, that have dramatically exited SnowRunner in support of moving over to BeamNG Drive. Now, there's nothing wrong with BeamNG Drive. I love BeamNG Drive. However, SnowRunner, in my opinion, was never marketed as an alternative to BeamNG Drive or as a rival to BeamNG Drive really in any way. SnowRunner is a lot more accessible of an experience. It's a lot less realistically simulated of an experience. However, I don't think that makes it any worse of an experience. It just all depends on what your priorities are in terms of what you're looking for. And obviously, if ultimate realism is your primary target or your primary goal, yeah, of course you're going to leave SnowRunner and go to BeamNG Drive. That's understandable. But what I don't understand is people that leave SnowRunner to go to BeamNG Drive and then come back over to SnowRunner content to just go on and on about how crappy of a game or crappy of an experience or how unrealistic they think SnowRunner is. And I'm not going to sit here and say that SnowRunner is some hyper-realistic experience because it's not. It's not at all. Now, granted, it has some pretty damn cool ground deformation and ground deformation physics, but that's about it in terms of where the physical simulation of the series lies, in my opinion. So if you're going to go on and on about how SnowRunner is not realistic and isn't a good simulation and everybody should just play BeamNG instead, I feel like you're entirely missing out on the point on why, 70 or 80% of the console user base bought this game. And that's because they wanted to have these memorable off-road experiences with their friends. They wanted to have the experience of hauling cargo down back roads with their friends. They wanted to have the experience of taking, trail rigs on modded maps with their friends. They wanted to have all of these experiences that they were watching for years on games like MudRunner, but weren't able to take part in because their consoles of choice didn't necessarily have access to the modding power. So after all of this, what's the takeaway? Where are we going from here? Now, I'm honestly really split and I'm really torn on this because obviously I want to be able to give a concise verdict. I want to be able to give kind of a future roadmap of what I think would benefit everyone in terms of SnowRunner. And I have some thoughts. One, overall stability needs to be addressed, period. 2, the game needs a ground up rebuild. It really, really does. I'm going to say that right now. It needs a ground up rebuild before the next installment. And 3, I think the development team really needs to continue to invest into the future of the modding community for this game, because I don't obviously know the official numbers on this, but I would imagine that a large percentage of this game's user base is here because of the modding community. And that is where we're going to leave the 2023 state of SnowRunner. And if you have anything you'd like to add, please leave all of your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below.